just tell you. So I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandfather's father used to play that game with him. So whenever he felt like the kid was acting up, it's like I could just beat you, but then you wouldn't take it. You wouldn't take in as much. But if you hurt me as much as I hurt you, you're gonna remember it.
Wow.
I was just curious, as far as like the creative inspiration, was it you knew you wanted to do something from this childhood memory or this anecdote, if you will, the game, or while you're writing the script, the game made its way into the script?
The game made its way into the script. So there's a feature-length script that I wrote of this like a couple years ago, and it began when I reread Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one of my favorite books, and there's this wonderful part in the middle where the monster meets the creator and tells him this whole story about like the creature was wandering around outside of this house and seeing the blind guy. And you've seen the movie, you know the whole deal. But I was reading the book and I was like, wow, this is really incredible. You know, the monster is kind of observing the stuff that's going on inside the family. And then I was like, well, what would happen if there were a little kid there? And then I was like, well, what would happen if it were kind of like where I grew up? And then it was like, well, why don't I start incorporating stuff from my grandfather's childhood into this more contemporary story? And then before you knew it, the monster was observing a human situation that I found far more troubling. I've always loved the monsters in movies, as you guys may have guessed. And then I find human behavior to be far more complicated, as you and I know very well, apparently. So the monster came first, and then the family.
Go ahead.
So how did you get into the process of deciding how the monster looked?
Well, it became a problem when we were trying to make it as a feature several years ago. The producers would want to do it, but there was always this confusion of what the monster would look like, and I always sort of thought, well, what if maybe one of these days I'll do a proof of concept. And then my brilliant director of photography, Dominic Savilli, who's standing back here, completely shanghaied me because he's like, hey, I got this $5,000 in my back pocket. It's like, burn it up. So why don't we go and make a proof of concept for that monster movie that you've always loved, and let's do it. So then I immediately went to this special effects artist that I work with all the time, and he's like, all right, we'll pay you this much money, and let's start designing concepts. And Dom was like, well, why don't we do a little Kickstarter or Indiegogo? Just, maybe we can like balance it out a little bit. I've spent $5,000. And then we start doing the fundraiser, and we get all the money. And he's like, thank God, because I didn't have any money at all. I was totally lying to you so that you would fulfill your dream and make this movie. But to answer your question, though, it's like so there's this artist I work with a lot named Beatrice Sniper, who's quite brilliant. She's done a few features with me. She's a wonderful artist. And what we started with was, there's a big old description of the monster in the text, but that led to her doing like 20 or 30 sketches, and then it would be like, well, no, the thing shouldn't have horns, and I don't know about, like what if the hair is like, make it long and tangled, and then we would just use references from nature, so it would be like the bark of trees or stones and stuff like that. But then it's like, how do you make the creature feminine? And then the next question became, what is the wardrobe? And we worked with a wardrobe designer and the actor Lucas Hassel, who's not a woman, but was playing one in our show. We would all talk about it together and say, like, well, what would the creature assemble for the wardrobe? And then just practically, it's like, we know we can make hands and a face and a wig, and so practical decisions dictated how much we could show. But then also it became like, what are the things from nature that we can actually pull in that could be plausible, And then also our actor was like 6'5", which also allowed, he's a classically trained brilliant actor, but like it allowed him to be tall and menacing.
I sense a strong conflict between masculinity and femininity actually in your film. I was really curious, the game is very masculine, the father is very masculine, the monster is actually very masculine. Can you maybe talk about that conflict that's in there? Or?
In 2 minutes? No.
Sorry.
But I'm going to stick around afterwards, and we can certainly have a drink and talk about all that stuff. But I can talk about it very generally and say that Of course it's on my mind, you know, you can't make a movie where it's like the kid is dealing with the loss of the mother, and then this creature is female, and then this dad is doing these very seemingly male-centric rituals with the kid. You know, I think that men are pretty fucked up. and I think that human beings are really fucked up, you know, and I think that don't get me wrong, I think women are really fucked up too. So so then it's like, okay, well, why don't we talk about that through metaphor, you know, and why don't we talk about that through imagery? Because, you know, you and I, not only can we not cover that ground in 2 minutes, but I don't think we could cover it in 2 hours. I mean, it's like this thing that we're going to be dealing with for our entire lives, you know? So it's like, so the way I choose to deal with the problems in my life and my confusions over gender politics or abuse is to talk about it through pictures and images, which is why I've, you know, gone into making movies as a profession, because I feel like you can convey a feeling and an intuition through a movie, and then genre and horror movies allow us to attack stuff that is very uncomfortable for us to talk about directly. So, you know, David Cronenberg made a movie called The Fly because it's very hard to make a movie about someone dying of cancer. It's very hard to process a human being dying of AIDS or cancer. You know, it's like something that we don't, even if we can emotionally, intuitively understand it, we can't describe it. And if we can, it's going to take us a long time to process it. But a guy turning into a giant fly, we can process that right away. You know, it's like, and we can feel that right away, and then we can cry afterwards when this thing dies. You know, we don't even understand why. So I've circled around your question because I don't think it's a question with an easy, identifiable answer, even if we talked about it for a really long time. It would still be complicated, and it would still be my limited perspective on it and your limited perspective on it, trying to understand. And I think that's very valuable. I mean, I think that having a dialogue is incredibly valuable to us as human beings. That said, I also don't trust words, and I also don't think that, you know, I don't think human beings really understand each other. The more we get to know someone, the more mysterious they become. So with a movie, maybe we can deal about it in an indirect way, which is why I think children respond so well to fairy tales, and adults respond to horror films.
Awesome. Well, thank you,
Thank you so
Jeremiah.
much.